Please be seated. Many thanks to all those angels who were singing. It's beautiful. Let us pray. O God, take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for you. Amen. There's a professor at Harvard who teaches at the graduate level and is beloved by his students. They respect him. They trust his wisdom. It's not just because he's broken new ground academically, although he has. And it's certainly not because he's an easy grader. Quite the contrary. It's very hard to get a good grade in this man's class and in that hard scrabble world of graduate school, where everyone needs an excellent and preferably unblemished record to move on to the next level. This professor does not make it easy, but he's still beloved by his students. Why? Here's what I think. This professor begins each lecture with these two words, dearest ones. I'm not even sure he realizes he does it. The two words come naturally from his lips. It's how he really does think of his students. Dearest ones, he always begins. And the students, they wait for those two words. Words almost too good to be true. He of all people calls them dearest ones. It's possible that you are someone who expects others to find you dear. You wouldn't be looking over your shoulder wondering, is it me he's speaking to? Perhaps, like some of our presidential candidates, you're fully confident of your talents and your dearness. You're the smartest person in the room. You get the hugest crowds, and others are all losers. But if once or twice there's been a moment when you have wondered whether anyone will again call you dearest one, or whether those who say it to you today really mean it, if you've ever wondered if you will have made any difference in the world after you're gone, whether anyone will miss you because you were dearest one, then maybe you too could find yourself wandering into the classroom where a brilliant and well-known professor opens each lecture by actually scanning the room to see everyone there and calling them all dearest ones. Some news is so good that it takes a long time to sink in. We have to keep returning to it over and over again. This week's lecture starts, dearest ones. And next week's lecture still starts, dearest ones. Perhaps it's like the layers of protective stain that it takes to cover an outdoor deck. The wood keeps soaking up those first few layers as if it's thirsty, and you can barely tell you've applied any, but slowly the stain sinks in. And with more coats over and over and over, you grow more assured that the wood will be protected, at least for the season, against the storms of life. Students who are called dearest ones. Jesus, hearing himself called beloved as he rises from the waters of his baptism. The people of Israel, forlorn in Babylon, wondering if they've been abandoned, and assured by the prophet Isaiah that God has called them by name. That God himself says to them, do not be afraid. You are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you. Sometimes the message is so good it takes a long time to sink in, but when it does sink in, when it soaks deeply into us all the way through us, our worlds can be transformed. In fact, I'm convinced the whole world can be transformed. Something becomes unlocked within us humans, so we are able to be a little less afraid. We're able to look beyond ourselves with more empathy, more compassion, and that's when deepest joy is found. Can these words from Isaiah 43 sink deeply into you? Do not be afraid. You are precious in my sight, says God. honored, and I love you. I raise this today because of two things that we're doing together as a congregation. First, this morning we began a series of learning sessions about Islam. It's fitting in this season of Epiphany, where we seek those new epiphanies and understandings. It's fitting now to seek deeper understandings of this sister faith. You see, a new child is being celebrated at Christmas. A new year is begun on our calendar. We make New Year's resolutions, and we yearn deeply for some new way of being, don't we? A new way of being in this world, on this planet together, people of all religions. And yet, as 2016 breaks, world news makes us seem forever doomed to battle and war. Immigrants can't find safe haven. Markets are controlled by a few and wreak economic havoc on all those less powerful. Public voices denigrate whole groups of people with impunity. Who will be the next target? Who, as 2016 begins, feels really safe? Who can hear Isaiah's words, "Do not be afraid"? But in this congregation, we don't concede that all is hopeless, that the only way to greater safety is through deeper hatred and greater violence. Here we actively seek a new and deeper understanding. We always will search out ways to look for making a better world for everyone. But the second important thing that we did today was to restate our covenant with our new members, a covenant that isn't based on a uniform adherence to a particular orthodoxy or creed, but based in our love of truth and our commitment to the service of all people, all. So Isaiah 43, you see, doesn't have to become some new creed that you have to adhere to, that you have to believe enough. Do you believe enough that God loves you? That God finds you precious and honors you, that God spoke to Jesus in the Jordan River and called him beloved? No. But I think that passage does show the way to a world where no one would need to feel afraid, where everyone could hear those words, "Do not be afraid." When would that ever be, though? Wouldn't it be when each girl and boy knew that they were precious and honored, each one? When each elder and middle-aged man and woman knew that they were precious and honored. When each felt they were dearest one, each beloved. When would that ever be? I think when we show them by our words and deeds over and over and over again. For how is it that you have ever felt precious? I don't mean in that silly, trite way that the word precious can be used today, but precious in that way of meaning of great worth, like precious jewels, diamonds, or rare gold. You are very highly valued in my eye. How have you ever felt that way, of inestimable value? And how could you tell? Was there perhaps a grandparent or aunt or a dear friend or a lover who showed you that you have intrinsic worth? Maybe by the way they gazed at you, or words they spoke, or their unwavering presence with you, a sheer delight in you. You were precious in their sight, and that could never be extinguished. Some of us don't know it, but at times we may have glimpsed it. Isaiah also says we are honored by God, and honoring is different, isn't it? You can be precious to those who are your peers, but to be honored conveys some kind of comparative difference of status or rank. The one honoring you somehow is bowing down before you, showing some deference as if they were subordinate. They're holding you in high esteem. Now, it doesn't mean that we're superior if we're being honored. In fact, sometimes I have felt most honored when the one who has a far higher worldly rank than I just makes time for me or asks me for help. They honor me, grant me dignity, though I'm the lower one on the totem pole. In Isaiah, God honors us, holds us in very high esteem. So here's another angle on this Isaiah 43. It's not just how God views us, although in my life that has been a great blessing in times of need to think that God finds me precious and is willing to be with me, call me by name, and honor me. But Isaiah 43 can also be read as our roadmap for how to practice thinking and acting towards others as if they were precious in our sight and honored and beloved, finding some way that we do not need to be afraid. Karen Armstrong, who is a scholar of world faiths, writes about the huge development in civilizations across the globe in what she and others have called the Axial Age, that period between about 900 BCE and 300, when the book of Isaiah was written, but also an age when all major world religions grew to their height of meaning. They did it all in reaction to the rampant fear and extreme violence that pervaded their world. Buddhism did not grow to its height in a time of peace and tranquility, nor did Islam. In fact, they were times of violence, and all of these religions grew because people wanted to react against it. When across the globe, in the Middle East and India and China, there was a revulsion against the predominant warrior culture. And sages had a conviction that there had to be a better way of living on the earth. Many traditions, from Judaism to the Jains, Buddhism, Taoist, later Christianity and Islam, all concluded two things for their followers. They were all things that they said led to an experience of transcendence, a deep joy beyond ourselves. Some call it nirvana, some call it Atman, and some say it's the experience of being known by God. And the two things are this. First of all, they all had a conviction of that all other humans should receive honor and dignity, that everyone's life should be treated as precious and of inestimable value. In Buddhism, we know the promise that no harm should be done to any sentient being. In Judaism, remember the teaching that you should remember that you were once a stranger in a strange land and treat all strangers amidst you as one of you. In Christianity, to love one another as we have already been loved. In Islam, the utter unity of all people and creation, a dignity within all of us that's irreducible because we are one with the Creator. But more than just this conviction of who and whose we all are, there was also in these traditions, secondly, a way to learn to treat others with honor, because it doesn't come naturally to us humans. It's hard to do. Instinctively, what we want to do whenever we are afraid, of course, is to first defend ourselves, to think of ourselves first and our own needs. Yet each of these traditions came up with a repeated practice over and over again. We call it the Golden Rule. It means emptying one's own ego and being self-aware, not putting the self first, empathizing with others, to not do anything to another that you wouldn't want to have done to you. You know, it comes from facing our own suffering rather than letting it breed resentment and revenge, turning our own suffering into an experience that leads us to compassion for others, not wanting others to suffer the way we have. It takes practice over and over again, and then we build our capacity to care, not only for ourselves, but for the whole world. You see, no one is excluded in the height of these traditions, what they taught. There have been misinterpretations since then, but not what the spiritual geniuses said, from Jesus to Muhammad, from Buddha to St. Paul. And when they acted this way, they all talk about a way of transcending ordinary human experience. Could we say maybe they had the conviction that they and all others were loved and valued and even need not be afraid? In the 1780s, just after the American Revolution, and as this church was beginning to carve a new way, becoming the first Unitarian church, based on this brand new commitment in our country to religious freedom and tolerance, seeking the truth. At that same time, in Germany, there was a philosopher named Lessing who wrote a play called Nathan the Wise. It was about religious tolerance, but unlike our Constitution allowing those rights. At that time in Germany, it was banned by Christian authorities. And it was banned because Nathan the Wise is a Jewish man, and he's the hero of the play. The play takes place in Jerusalem in the 1200s during a brief time of peace between the Third and Fourth Crusades. And at the center of it is a fable told by Nathan the Wise. He's asked by his good friend, the Sultan of Jerusalem, who is Muslim, which of the three Abrahamic faiths is the most true, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? And Nathan answers with a story about a magic ring. The ring gave the bearer power to be beloved by God and by all peoples. If you had the ring, you would be the beloved one. The ring was passed down from father to son for generations, but it didn't go strictly in birth order. Each time it was passed down, the father was to choose the son most precious to him and give the ring to the precious son. That child would then get to be head of the family, even if not the eldest. One father had 3 sons and loved each of them equally. At various times when the father was with one of the sons, he would feel convinced that that son was the most precious and would promise him the ring. But the kind-hearted father over time made the promise to each of the 3 boys. Though he knew that all 3 could not receive the ring, he made the promise. As the father's death grew near, he made this decision to ask a jeweler to make 3 exact rings and to spare no expense so that they would be identical, none being able to be told from the other. The jeweler succeeded, and the father was able to give each son a ring, none of them knowing that there were triplicates. However, after the father died, all 3 sons came forward to claim leadership of the family and were horrified to discover the 3 rings because each son was convinced that he was the most precious based on his own father's words. The brothers took the case to a judge who heard their testimony, and the judge reasoned this way. Without your father here, I cannot tell which of you your father found to be the most precious son. All of you are beloved and precious to your father according to your testimony. In a similar way, said Nathan the Wise to his friend, the Sultan, because I cannot talk with God directly, I can't tell whether it is Judaism or Christianity or Islam that is the most precious, the most beloved. Each is. But the Sultan persisted with Nathan the Wise. Is that all? There was nothing else in that story? No, said Nathan. The judge did know that the holder of the true ring would be beloved not only to God, but to all people. So the judge asked the 3 brothers, which of you is most beloved to the others? The brothers fell silent, and the judge said, each of you is most beloved to yourself. So perhaps none of you has the real ring. But then the judge continued this way. I recommend this. Each of you should live as if you had the real ring. Act in ways that make you loved by God and by all people. Be compassionate. Honor all. Treat all others the way you would like to be treated, and then in time we will learn who has the real ring. It's by our actions that we learn. You see, we don't wait until we experience transcendence to act with compassion. We don't wait until we believe with perfect trust that we and all others are precious and honored. It's when we make the decision to begin to act with hope as if each were, even as if we were, honoring all, and that through that repeated practice, time and time and time again, we experience it. Call it nirvana or God. We experience that we have nothing to fear. Sometimes the news is so amazing, so good. It takes many, many times to hear it. It takes practice over and over and over again to learn how to act as if we are loved and honored and precious, and others are too. Isaiah knew that hard times would come. He said, the waters, when you walk through the rivers, you won't be overwhelmed. The rivers will come, but you won't be overwhelmed. He said that you will feel betrayals, that make you feel as if you burn, but when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. You might feel confused, but I will be with you. So even when the worst happens, even when you die, it will be all right. All traditions have found this in some way. Do not be afraid. You are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you. Imagine.